Hello and welcome to the latest of my deep dive videos. Today I'm going to be exploring the influence of Saturn. Saturn has been in the sign of Aquarius, first of all from the 22nd of March through to the 3rd of August 2020, and then from the 17th of December 2020 right through till now. Now it's going to be leaving Aquarius and entering the sign of Pisces on the 7th of March 2023. It finishes its retrograde, which began on the 4th of June 2022 on October the 22nd or 23rd, depending on where you're located in the world. Now what I want to do is share with you what this change of Saturn stationing direct means, and also the event chart. How's that going to inform the period from now through till the 7th of March? Also, Saturn's going to be forging some other key influences during that time, and I'm going to give you each of the dates which can help you to negotiate its challenges, but also to embrace its opportunities and help. So please stay with me for that. But if you would like to understand what year 2023 will hold for you, if you give me 3 pieces of personal birth data of time, date and place of birth, I can give you your year 2023 forecast, but the rest of year 2022 free. Plus in my special package, your life roadmap, your character analysis, which will help you to understand some of the repetitive patterns that have been challenging in your life, but also to seize on your talents and the opportunities you have in a much firmer way. And in that package, there is 30% off. Please see the link beneath this video. Also, if you're new to my channel, thank you so much for joining me. I'd be delighted if you would subscribe. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. If you already have done, thank you so much for your ongoing support. So Saturn stationed direct on the 22nd, 23rd of October, but you know, it doesn't actually really move forwards from that exact degree, which is of 18 degrees and 35 minutes Aquarius, until it moves forwards 1 minute on the 27th of October. But also I need to tell you that Saturn will be in its shadow period through till January 26. And I think it's going to be then that we really start to evolve from its grip. Now, of course, Saturn has an influence wherever it is, and it's going to be the same when it enters the sign of Pisces on the 7th of March. So I will be sharing about that too. But I want to also give you an idea of what this period from the end of October through to the early part of March is going to be for each of the 12 zodiac signs. So you can benefit from the more astrological analysis I'm going to share with you, but also from a zodiacal viewpoint too. So please stay with me, and you can watch that in terms of your sun or your ascendant. So on the screen now, I'm sharing the event chart based on Universal Central Time. And you can see that the ascendant is at 2 degrees and 23 minutes in Libra. This Libran energy is very much an encouragement for us all to try to work together collectively. You can see the moon is just in the 12th house in Placidus, which does suggest that there is some mourning going on. And that mourning, I feel, for all of us, is coming to terms with this new financial reality that's been developing in recent months, which is making life much more difficult for many of us. But you can also see on the other side of the chart, Jupiter is very close to the 7th house cusp, how we relate to people directly. So that's really quite nice. It suggests that if we can have faith in one another, there can be solutions that develop, but we're probably going to have to be much more collaborative in our approach. But also you can see that the sun is at 29.43 at 29.48. Now, of course, in terms of people who are intently interested in astrology, there was an exact conjunction between the Sun and Venus on the 22nd of October, and this is known as cazimi. Now, the interesting thing about that particular relationship is that Venus governs the sign of Libra, so it's said to have given that combination a special strength, a special opportunity to harmonize with others. Now, I'm going to be slightly controversial here, because the problem with that assumption is that it doesn't take into account the influence of other planets on the Sun and Venus. And you can see in this chart that Pluto, the planet of transformation, is in Capricorn still, as it will be, until it moves into Aquarius briefly next year, before coming in full time for the foreseeable future in 2024 on the 21st of January. So you can see that the Sun and Venus are in house 2, very much about what we consume, our self-worth and our values, but Pluto's squaring them. So if we take the Sun in a more simplified form of astrology as being the first house, it means that Pluto's on the 4th house cusp. So whether we're talking about this astrological Placidus wheel with the 2-degree Libran ascendant, or we're talking about the Sun as the starting point, Pluto still ends up in the 4th house. And that means transformation around our sense of security. So whilst we may hope that the cazimi between the Sun and Venus was magical, and perhaps it was for some people, I still feel that there's been a week that's just passed in the preceding week, where there's been quite a lot of tension and perhaps leverage that's been applied in all sorts of relationships. Now, of course, the Sun and Venus are about to move into the sign of Scorpio. But if you look at the position of Jupiter, it may be really positive in terms of the ascendant and the position of the Moon, but much less so in terms of the Sun and Venus. It's in a quincunx. And that means we can't be too optimistic in our approach. We need to be realistic, especially around resources. And you can see there are the Sun and Venus in the sector of resources, the 2nd house. And of course, although Venus rules Libra, it also governs the sign of Taurus, which is house 2. So we're getting some Tauran energy from this event. But what about Saturn? Well, Saturn does actually forge a superb angle with Mercury, and you can see Mercury's in house 1, right next door to the midpoint between the Sun and the Moon, also in Libra. So Saturn is really anchoring those influences very well, but it's suggesting that in some ways we need to start afresh, think of how we can approach things in a new systematic way, but lots of communication needs to flow between us because of the democratic and diplomatic nature of Libra and its desire for balance. But much more challenging is Saturn's relationship with the North Node and Uranus. And you can see there in house 8, and that's about long-term finance. It's also about where we're most devoted. It can be about property matter, stocks and shares, insurances, and the 5th house can be about risk. So basically this chart is saying that Saturn can anchor good ideas, but it will really potentially punish any recklessness around long-term finances. And we've seen with what happened with the recent British government, where they came up with a mini budget that wasn't properly thought through, it wasn't properly costed, it wasn't rehearsed with the various auditory bodies that provide a protection to governments in terms of their planning. And that recklessness cost a lot of money because interest rates went up almost instantly, and that's added to the burden for everyday people. You can see that Mars is right at the top of this chart in the 9th house. That points towards international affairs, and it is forging a pretty good link with Saturn, and they do actually come into a really brilliant relationship, and I will tell you about that. That's one of the excellent links that's going to be developing between now and the 7th of March. But in this immediate situation, what Mars is doing is forging a great link with the Sun and Venus, but a really dangerous link to Pluto. So we have Mars in the 9th house of international affairs, and Mars can be a very instant influence. It can be about gratification of our desires, but in the sign of Gemini, it's very much about dogma, the propagation of people's beliefs, but potentially in a forceful way. And because it's in a quincunx with Pluto in the 4th house, I feel all of our security is going to be affected by the international scene from now through till March the 7th. So, to sum up, this event chart suggests that diplomacy, listening to one another, trying to find the things that we share in common, that very Libran energy is very valuable. But I think we have to accept that however much we try to show good faith, there is the potential for great disruption between Uranus's square with Saturn, and also Mars's quincunx with Pluto, but also crucially Mars's right angle with Neptune, which is the tricks that influence bar none. And you can see that Neptune's in the 6th house, very much about personal responsibility, obligations to others, where we help people. But there are going to be some people that are not thinking about the needs of personkind. They're very much focused on their own needs. And I think that Saturn being in the 5th house really reminds us that perhaps we need to work harder at finding new ways to enjoy life that aren't necessarily so linked to the material world, because the energy in the 2nd house of the Sun, of Venus, and the part of fortune, all in a conjunction, on the face of it looks very healthy. But when we take into account the quincunx with Jupiter, even with Neptune, and also that very challenging quincunx between Mars and Pluto, and Saturn and Uranus's square, this is quite a turbulent period for the world at large. So what I'm going to do now is tell you exactly how Saturn inches forwards and what the implications are for all of us. Now, as I said before, on the 27th of October, Saturn moves forwards 1 minute, so it's no longer stationing direct. Now, you will read some astrologers saying that whilst it stations direct, it creates a lot of frustration. But the thing is, as this event occurs, Saturn and Uranus, which have been the most overpowering influence of the last 2 years, are only 1 degree apart. So, just because Saturn has ended its retrograde and doesn't move as we see it from the Earth, doesn't mean to say that Uranus isn't creating loads of tension, because it is, whether it's industrial disputes, whether it's shortages to do with food, distribution, whether it's the cost of physical resources in terms of energy, or whether it's the seizing of land and assets in a forceful way, which goes against the rights of many of us. And I should say that Saturn is in the sign of the collective. So when it leaves Aquarius to go into Pisces, it moves into the most reflective part of our situation, because it's entering the 12th zodiac sign. The symbolism of the zodiac is we start out excited and eager with the 1st house and Aries, but once we get to Pisces in the 12th house, it's a time of reflection and coming to terms with all the lessons that have been learnt in the previous 31 years, which is the time that Saturn takes to go through its entire cycle. So this period is in a way preparing us for what is going to develop with Saturn in Pisces, and I'm going to explore that shortly. But let's just go forward still with our analysis. So from the 7th to the 14th of November, Saturn is in a square with the Sun in Scorpio, because obviously the position of the Sun and Venus changes on the 23rd, and they move into the sign of Scorpio. And the significant thing about that, of course, is that Venus is in detriment in the sign of Scorpio, but the fact that Saturn is squaring the Sun across the 7th and 14th of November can create quite a lot of limitation around financial markets. And of course, we have that amazingly powerful lunar eclipse, total lunar eclipse, on the 8th of November, which will be really feeling the draft of both Saturn and Uranus. So that event is going to see some very big reverberations, which could go on right through the next 6 months. So a key date, the 8th of November, but from the 7th to the 14th, within 3 degrees, Saturn and the Sun are in a right angle, which is very limiting to the Sun's burn, the warmth, the drive it gives us all. And of course, Saturn can be limiting, restraining. So I think collective finances are going to be under a huge amount of pressure. One of the ways that could be would be through pension funds, quite honestly. Now, from the 14th of November to the 10th of February, Saturn forges a semi-sextile with Neptune. Now, Neptune has and continues to forge through October and all the way through November a very testing right angle to Mars. And of course, Mars is going to go retrograde on the 30th of October, but that square with Mars at first became exact on the 12th of October. It's going to be repeated on the 19th of November. But Saturn intersects this difficult relationship with Mars, which can really dissolve our drive or confuse us about the things we desire. And here, the 11th house is collaborating with the 12th house, in a way preparing to receive the energy of Saturn going into Pisces. So I think this is saying that if we can find compassionate ways collectively, Saturn and Aquarius, to work in ways that help those who are less fortunate, that's something we have a great opportunity to do for 2 full months from the 14th of November within 3 degrees. Now, on the 15th of November, Saturn moves to 19 degrees 02. So it's moved out of the 18 degrees and it's into the 19 degrees. So it's beginning to pick up a bit of speed very slowly. From the 19th of November to the 8th of December, Saturn in Aquarius is forging a trine within 3 degrees to Mars. And of course, Mars is in an air sign, Gemini, just like Aquarius, the Aquarius location of Saturn, and it's exact on November the 28th. This is showing where our ideas, if we're patient, Saturn, and we don't get too frustrated, Mars, because of Mars's retrograde, that there is something that we can bring about which can be very constructive, but particularly around our ideas and our interactions. So if we can be more measured in how we communicate with each other and less impulsive, that's something that can benefit from that relationship. Now, on the 2nd of December, a really important moment, because after 2 years of almost non-stop attritional agitation between each other, the two rulers of Aquarius, Saturn traditional, Uranus modern, stretch out to 4 degrees in their square. The square, of course, is exact at 90 degrees, but over the previous 2 years, they pretty well, a lot of the time, being within 3 degrees. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. But that has come to a close. That's not going to be repeated. So the tensions that we've all been experiencing with that very difficult right angle. Saturn's about restraint, remember. Uranus is about the need for impulsive change. It's about the truth. In mythology, Uranus is the ruler of the sky. It's the higher knowledge. Saturn's much more about the tradition and maintaining the status quo. So we've had elements that have wanted to hold on to the old way of doing things, particularly with Pluto in Capricorn, but also a more progressive agenda coming through, which other people don't like or resisting, or other people are really embracing. So we've had a lot of polarized opinions and actions and tensions affecting us all. And it does obviously include the impact of COVID and also the financial crunch, which has been developing particularly much more this year. We had that lineup of planets in the sign of Taurus with the North Node, Uranus and Mars. That was particularly volatile. And of course, now that total lunar eclipse on the 8th of November, bringing everything up to a crescendo, I feel, in terms of our values and our use of resources, which we all know we've got to use in a much more careful way, not just because it's good for the planet, because we can't afford to be too wasteful. Now, from the 20th of January through to the 25th of January, Saturn is going to align with Venus in Aquarius. But on the 21st of January, we have an Aquarius new moon, and the combination of Venus and Saturn in Aquarius is exact. Any kind of relationship in your world that you don't see going long term for your future is really going to be severely tested at that time. But also, it could be where certain alliances and relationships get a lot stronger. You know, if you feel that people share your values, the loyalty and stability that Saturn can bring can be very good. Venus in Aquarius can be more detached, much more democratic, a little bit less caught up with the lovey-dovey stuff and more realistic in our expectations. But any weak relationship could be really diminuted from the 20th through to the 25th. No doubt about it, whether it's a friendship, a group involvement, a collaborative effort, something to do with a colleague that you've been working closely with, or a love relationship. If it's not really working, it's probably going to really be severely tested at that time. But on January the 26th, we have a magical moment because Saturn ends its shadow or emerges from its shadow period. So this really is the release from the clutches of Saturn's more challenging influence in Aquarius. But we must always remember that whether it's a zodiac sign or a planet or a house system, or wherever the zodiac sign is located in terms of the individual house number or the planets gathered around the natal chart, there is always going to be the highest and most positive form of that expression and the more challenging one. So I think Saturn emerging from shadow here means that, you know, the exhausting process that we've all gone through, the war in the Ukraine, the situation with COVID, the situation with increased energy costs, the political instability that's been going on in many places in the world, the polarized opinions, because Aquarius can be a very radical influence, but also one that defends democratic principles too. Now, all February, Saturn, remember it's been in that great semi-sextile with Neptune, is actually forging a semi-sextile with Pluto. Now, Pluto in Capricorn, oh, what a mighty influence that's been since 2008. And of course, it's going to be moving into Aquarius for a brief sojourn in 23. But all of February, if we can work with the best of the old way of doing things, the institutions and traditions and courtesies of approaching things in a very stable way, but a measured way. So it's not just about the worst side of Pluto in Capricorn, which is about sheer greed and power. We bring in the more democratic energies of Saturn. Some kind of evolution is starting to really evolve in February, and it's going to become much clearer once Pluto moves into Aquarius on the 21st of January 2024. But that brings this story to Saturn entering Pisces. So what will the implications be broadly over the next 2.5 years? Well, I think the damage that we've done to anything to do with water is really going to come home to haunt us. Now we can see we've got enough information to know that the amount of toxins that are in rivers and oceans and lakes have significantly gone up over the years. And Saturn, of course, can punish, but it also can push us to find solutions. So I think it's an easy spot, isn't it? Pisces, the water sign, the glyph, the two fish going in opposite directions. Saturn's going to ask us to clean up our act when it comes to the environment, but particularly to do with any consumption of water. So for example, you know, if we're drinking an awful lot of bottled water in small bottles, if we can get a filter on our taps at home, get cleaner water in a cost-effective way, we're not using those plastics, which of course many of those plastics don't degrade, and that's an enormous problem. So I think environmental issues are going to be enormously important in the following 2.5 years. Saturn, I think, is also going to challenge in lots of ways probably traditional religions. If traditional religions have felt for some people, and I think this has been a process that's been going on for some while, to no longer have the same relevance to them, then I think that is going to be something that will be tested. But it could also be a rebirth in some ways, because when I watch occasionally YouTube videos, astrology videos, sometimes astrologers tend to characterize Saturn and Jupiter, for example, in very binary ways. Saturn's evil, Jupiter's amazing. But you know, if I'm doing a reading for a client on a one-to-one, often when Saturn moves over a critical cusp or a critical planet, or is going through a period of intense influence, if we really work at it, that can be the sector or the part of a person's life where opportunities lay. So I feel that if we can use the stability of Saturn to find more ways that we can use our resources in a more sensitive way, which is obviously the energy of Pisces, that can be a really terrific thing too. Also, Pisces is very much about the human condition, its worries, its anxieties, its caringness, but also where we may use our compassion and sensitivity to help others. Saturn can encourage us to work at those things. Of course, there's going to be some elements that might push back at those type of things. So I think that psychic phenomena, strangely, could take a little bit of a hit with Saturn moving through Pisces. Now, if you're a psychic, I must reassure you that I have total belief in what you do. But I'm just saying, in terms of the wider spiritual field, I think astrology will continue to gather more and more influence, because the technical elements of astrology is something that a lot of people find reassuring, even if parts of it are still very much to do with instinct and the reader's ability to work with people and have life experiences, which makes that reading meaningful. But I think for those people who have perhaps offered services that have been a little bit more based on revenue generation rather than sincerity, they will be the ones that get severely tested. So if you're offering a service that's very much coming from the heart and with great sincerity, I think Saturn could strengthen your business during that transition. But if it's a bigger business around the provision of services, and really the true motive is revenue generation, it will be tested. Now also, of course, Saturn is very much to do with our boundaries and our the tests that we can have. So we have a lot of these huge ships being built for leisure cruises. Now, you may have been on a cruise. I know a few people who have been on cruises and had an absolutely amazing time. But they're huge, aren't they? So if we think that Pisces is very much to do with water, and the transition of goods by ship is probably going to become quite a hot topic. So I would say that the desire to open up the Northern Passage, especially with the loss of sea ice in that part of the world, could see some politics and tensions in terms of geopolitical energies. There may be some tensions in the northern hemisphere as commercial shipping tries to take advantage of the changes to the polar caps, and that obviously won't necessarily always be a good thing. But there could also be some pushback against cruises in terms of business, or possibly they could continue to thrive. I mean, I can't think of anything that I would least want to do, but I like space, freedom and quiet, even if I love being by the sea. I don't necessarily want to have a set load of pursuits that I can join in with loads of other people in a confined space. Other people absolutely love them, but the particulates that come out of the chimney of these big ships can be frightening in terms of the environment. So I think there's likely to be more legislation and pushing to have a more joined up way of thinking. So those are just a few little samples, little snippets of what we can expect with Saturn moving into Pisces from the 7th of March next year. But of course we've got other big changes. Pluto into Aquarius briefly. We've got a change in the eclipse series where we've got a new eclipse on the 20th, a solar eclipse on the 20th of April, conjunct Jupiter in Aries, which is going to be like a fresh start in lots of ways. We've got a healing lunar eclipse on the 5th of May, which can be much better for financial markets. We also have Jupiter moving into Taurus, which can be good for money, on the 16th of May. The North Node moves into Aries itself on the 13th of July. So a lot of big changes come in next year that will be working in relation to Saturn in the sign of Pisces. But I would say that physical energy with people who have Saturn in Pisces in their natal charts can often need a little bit of care. Otherwise, you can get exhaustion illnesses, draining type of influences. So important to really look after the body. Saturn's very much about the physical structure, and obviously the more we can enjoy bathing or some healing techniques, whether it's massage or aromatherapy or osteopathy or chiropractic, all these things very much to do with healing but structure of our bones and bodies. Those things are going to come even more into vogue over the next few years. Now please stay with me as I give you a flavour of what you can expect for each of the zodiac signs from the 22nd, 23rd of October through to the 7th of March. So Aries, it's all about those friendships. Those friendships may have been really tested this year, particularly I feel when it comes to a difference of values. It may not be that you've actually fallen out, as more as wanted space for the relationships that don't work so well. That's going to continue to be a theme, but as Saturn moves into Pisces, the following 2.5 years will be a time of intense transformation for your psychological outlook, and also understanding much more deeply what really makes you tick, but also those of the other people you encounter. Neptune's given you a flavour of that since 2012, but in a way that has actually been very beneficial in lots of ways, even if your physical vitality may have been influenced by that in some ways. Of course, across October, November and even March 2023, the square between Neptune and Mars may see more disappointment, to be frank, when it comes to people's honesty and sincerity and loyalty. But what you're going to find during this period from the end of October through to the start of March is that the people who are the really solid citizens in your world are really going to show up for you. And it could be a bit of a surprise who some of those folks are, because it may be the people that you don't necessarily feel as immediately comfortable with, who are actually the people who you realise are actually very good for you. So they may not necessarily reflect your energy in quick phone calls or quick messages in a way that is very confirming and reinforcing, but actually there may be a deeper part of these types of people that you can start to see have a real role and benefit to you. So the quality of your friendships is something that's very, very important. And you must, of course, continue, like all of us, to be focused on how you're going to work your way forward. So your long-term planning is a crucial part of the process at the present time. Now, Taurus, Saturn for you has been in your sector of work and responsibilities and obligations full-time since the 17th of December 20, and that may have been an area that has been very stressful. And especially if you're someone who has been challenging your own previous preference for continuity. You have a legendary reputation for liking to keep things nice and steady. It gives you a sense of comfort and security. But I think that you may have surprised yourself by how much you may have pushed back against some of the rules and regulations and expectations that people may have had. There can be more of this to come, but I think all the practice and knowledge and experience over the last couple of years, as we come into this last phase of Saturn moving through Aquarius, I think the lessons you've learned have really equipped you brilliantly to understand what you really need in balancing where you want a degree of reward and recognition and status, Saturn in the 10th house, with against maintaining your individuality and your authenticity. So it's all very well having the big job, the big car, the big house. If it's doing something that completely pulverizes your passion, there's still time for you to make a change. But I think all the lessons you've learned over the last couple of years are really going to come back to you now in a very helpful way. And most of all, I think the tension's really going to start to ease from the first week of December. Now, Gemini, having Saturn in the 9th house is brilliant if you're involved in technology, teaching, training, the travel sector, if you've been able to work effectively across those areas, publishing as well. But of course, because of COVID, perhaps those areas have taken a particular hit. So if you have been someone who's been used to moving around for your employment, the impact of COVID may have been quite devastating financially. And of course, Saturn is also been testing your philosophies, what you really believe in. And maybe there's been some legal things you've had to go through. Maybe you've had to stand up for a point of principle. Maybe your desire to travel has been severely limited. And because Uranus has been in your 12th house, I feel it's your nervous system that may have taken the rap. So, like Taurus, once Saturn and Uranus stop being so acutely in a right angle, at the start of the first week of December, and also Mars in your sign is no longer conflicted by the dissolving energies of Neptune, also at the start of December, I think you're going to start to feel a lot better. And of course, the world is opening up somewhat more. And once Mars goes into direct motion on the 12th of January, you have a real opportunity in those following 2 months to get on the front foot about any message that you want to share. You know, whether it's in an interview where you want to come across as a very compelling candidate, whether you want to self-publish, whether you want to buy a new mode of transport, whether you want to have a really well-deserved break. I think the opportunities will really start to come through for you from the 12th of January. So Cancer, the position of Saturn has been in your 8th house, shared finance, where we're most invested. And the 8th house can also be a time of transitions. And of course, it's a very plutonic part of our situation, but it, just for you, happens to be having had Saturn moving through it. So there may have been some big changes. Maybe a long-term source of income has dried up over the last couple of years, or if you've had a particularly stable business, maybe that's been affected by the blowback from COVID and then all the increased costs of living that we've been experiencing. Now, of course, Uranus has been in your 11th house, which has been pushing you to be much more idealistic, just at a time you want to figure your future, just at a time when the physical resources may have felt quite limited. But I think there is an opportunity still to make progress. And again, for all of us, as Saturn comes to the end of its particular journey through each zodiac sign, we've learned a lot from Saturn's help. Yes, it can be a very, very challenging influence, but it also can be, if we submit to it and we simplify our life and work effectively and systematically and productively with Saturn's help, roll up our sleeves and really put our shoulder to the wind, that's when we get real success with Saturn. So something could be reborn for you, even if it's in a more realistic way than perhaps you would have hoped, ready for when Saturn makes its way into your sister water sign of Pisces on the 7th of March. Leo, well, Saturn for you has been in your sector of relationships. If there have been some tense moments over the last couple of years, it really wouldn't be a surprise. There may have even been some people who've left your situation completely, or you have left theirs. And of course, Saturn in its retrograde in the 7th house may have been asking you to dig down to understand more about why some of your relationships work out or have worked out in the recent past in quite the way they have. Perhaps part of the issue has been that Uranus has been in your sector of domination, the 10th house. This is where we want to be the captain of the ship. But Uranus doesn't like to take orders from anyone, so it's fine being the captain. It's not so good being the collaborator. And Saturn in the 7th house is asking you to work with people, not just expect people to work for you or just be aware of your magnificence, which of course, you know, every Leo has the potential to radiate a true regal presence. But I think Uranus has been making things quite unpredictable in terms of your work, and it just seems that how you interact with people has become a lot heavier and not as free-flowing as you would like. But once we come into that start of December, things can start to move. And of course, we do have that great link between Mars and Saturn as well, suggesting the links you do have with folks or groups of people that are very constructive can thrive for you. But that combination between Venus and Saturn in January is a big test. But then again, someone could come into your life between then and now, and that could be a time when the relationship really makes its mark and starts to settle into something much more enduring. Saturn doesn't work in any one way, just like any other planet, any other house, system, number, or any other zodiac sign. It's all got its upside and its downside, but your relationships could be tested still in January, but you're being asked to develop a greater understanding of the politics of relationships. And so obviously, because Aquarius is very much about the collective and Leo is very much about the individual, if you have found that your individuality has been challenged or your modus operandi has been pushed back by people, try to understand where they're coming from. It may not be as personal as you feel. It may be more to do with your politics or the way that they feel that you could work in a more integrated way. So that's a question to pose for you. But if you've got a relationship evolving that's really meaningful, it could become something that's very long lasting by the end of January. Now, once Saturn moves into your 8th house, it's very much your business interests that come under the astral spotlight over the following 2.5 years, or anything to do with your long-term financial planning, property matters, shares, investments, what you're doing in terms of future legacies, in terms of planning for your loved ones' future prospects. There's going to be a lot of activity around those areas for you. Now, Virgo, for you, the end of Saturn rewinding in the 6th house is good for your health, fitness and energy. It's not to say that they've been bad, it's more because Saturn and Uranus have been in this quarrel. Your desire to be a free spirit has been pushing you to take a contraindication position to your natural tendency to be a very helpful servant. I don't mean servile. I mean someone who provides services in a way that's honourable, dignified, efficient and very healing. Brilliant. Those are all your top qualities. But if your health has taken a bit of a pummeling, I feel that Saturn ending its retrograde is something to really celebrate. And from now through to the time when Saturn moves into your opposite sign, there's an opportunity to get fitter, more aware of the nutrients that you're eating and drinking, and trying to clean up your act even more. But perhaps a more rebellious side of your nature has been pushing back against your own innate tendency to be very disciplined and to embrace the purer approach to situations. I think Uranus has made you a bit of a rebel in those areas, particularly around work practices and the sort of terms and conditions of your situation. If they're not particularly favourable to you, I think the militant in you has been aroused. But of course, once Saturn moves into Pisces on the 7th of March, you're in for a 2.5 year period where it's all about opportunities or potential challenges around relationships. Which brings us to Libra. Now obviously the event chart shows the Sun and Venus very much together in a cazimi, because it's within 17 minutes when this event occurs, and it also shows Mercury and the Moon and the Ascendant all in your sign. So this is really giving you a lot of power, and Saturn's also forging a very good link with Mercury. So your challenge over the last many years really has been mainly coming from Pluto in the 4th house. But I think your love life may have been a bit disappointing over the last 2.5 years. As much as you want to manifest some kind of improvement, the COVID regulations may have made it difficult to meet people, or the people you did meet, perhaps it didn't quite chime in the way you want. And part of the reason for that is you're not going to give away your devotion in the way you have in the past if it means compromising your individuality, and that's Uranus in the 8th house. So it's caused a lot of tension and probably some disappointments. Your desire to be a bit more risk-taking around your love life or even around your finances has really been challenged. But because this event gives you so much energy to go forwards, you still need to deal with the challenge of Pluto because it's squaring up with your ruler and the Sun. But Saturn itself forges a good link with Mercury. So the more you think and plan and are aware of your qualities, you have Jupiter on your 7th house cusp, which is glorious. It's going to be moving back there after its retrograde back into Pisces on the 20th of December, and Jupiter will be in your sector of relating through to the 16th of May next year. So it can change around your relationship situation. And of course, Saturn then is going to move in March into your 6th house, which is about the type of work you do, looking after your health in as productive way as possible. But I think once we get the Saturn-Uranus square out of the situation at the start of December, and Mars is square with Neptune, that will be really helpful. And of course, there is that fantastic solar eclipse on the 20th of April next year. We also have a Aries new moon on the 21st of March, just after the spring solstice, which both those events can be very positive for your relationship prospects, as can the North Node moving into Aries on the 13th of July. So if you experience a few more disappointments from now through to the time that Saturn moves, just be aware that rejection is protection. So if someone's not quite getting your qualities, or they don't stack up for what you need, just be aware it's preparing you for a period that can be so much more productive for all sorts of relationships. Scorpio, for you, the combination of the Sun, Venus, which of course is in detriment in your sign, Mercury, the midpoint, the Ascendant on the event chart, and the Moon, all in your 12th house. That's a lot to do with reflection. But of course the Sun and Venus move into your sign soon after. But I think the real challenge for you over the last couple of years has been more about your emotional health and more about that side of you that likes to be very private about your feelings, but you can be quite blunt about other people's. Now, Uranus in your opposite sign has probably not dimmed your bluntness, but because there has been a square with Saturn in your 4th house, if being closely cooped up, especially through COVID, with other members of your household, that would have been particularly challenging for you. So if you've managed to escape and break out since the COVID regulations were eased, that would have been very good for you. But I still think there's a little way to go when it comes to your home and emotional life. But what I can say is that there may be an opportunity to finally get a home improvement project to exactly where you want it in mid-January, or it could be that you're going to move altogether if it gives you exactly what you need. And one of the things that you may need if you're in a family situation is more space, particularly if the family's growing. But I think your emotional situation, family life, has probably had quite a lot of strains and restrictions. With Saturn moving into your 5th house, that's pushing you to make the most of your talents, your creativity, your self-expression. But Saturn in the 5th house is not a bag of fun. We have to really work at it. But Saturn in every house, we have to work at it. Saturn's not exclusive in its influence to any one part of our situation. It's always active in some kind of way. Which brings us to Sagittarius. The big challenge for you over the last couple of years has been stress, I feel. That stress is going to improve manifestly from the start of December. There could be something to do with ideas you have, or writing you do, or technology skills you have. Some way that you interact with other people. By around about the 21st of January, you can come across with real impact, and people can be very receptive to the ideas you have. Saturn moves into your 4th house on the 7th of March, and that points towards maybe a renovation of a home, a downsizing, an upsizing, depending on your situation. People leaving home, people coming back home. Saturn in the 4th house, it's all going on around your family life. Could be a new addition to the family, which may be extra responsibility, but something you really want. So the good news is that I think that Saturn going direct for you is going to ease some of the nervous stress that has been so prevalent for you. But if you can find ways to take a breath, understand that your free and easy nature is your great gift, but what Uranus is asking you to do is to try to reform the everyday part of your life in a way which gives you a nice balance between where you have to be obligated to others, but where you need to feel space for you. And that's really the nub of your situation. Now Capricorn, of course Saturn's your ruler, and it's been in your 2nd house, which is not great when it comes to finance. Everyday finance, so some kind of income stream may have dried up, got more difficult, but it has also been in a right angle to Uranus, which can be in the 5th house, very much about chance, risk, speculation. So it's been a very bare and rather limited skyscape for you when it comes to being more galvanized in that way. But let's think about your innate nature. Your innate nature is one of shrewdness, conservatism. You don't necessarily bundle into situations without a great deal of thought. I think from the start of December you will start to feel better. Obviously we're all facing significant changes to the financial landscape, but I still feel that you can start to see some progress from all the hard work and discipline you've been pouring into your situation if you've really applied yourself over the last couple of years as we go into the new year. And some of the individual ideas you may have tried in the past which didn't quite work may need just a bit more modification, but there's a wonderful skyscape developing in December to help you go into 23 in a really fantastic way. So I feel that you're going to get your reward by the middle to the 3rd week of January after a lot of graft and application. If you decide to change tack and do something completely different, I think Saturn moving into your 3rd house could see you study for a new qualification, learn more about technology. It may see you decide to move around less and work from home, save time that way. Or it could see you learn to drive if you've never done that. So it just depends on your unique circumstances. Aquarius, now obviously having Saturn in the first house can be quite challenging for physical vitality. So if your energy has been low over the last couple of years and you felt at the same time very restless about where to live and your mind's kept changing about what to do, that hasn't been a very pleasant situation at times, because there's an innate lack of feeling just rooted. And because your two rulers have really been quarrelling to such a degree, I think your sign has probably taken the rap as much as anyone else, to be honest. But the good news is that as that collection of energy develops in January, the new moon of the 21st, and Saturn conjunct Venus, that is really going to be a testing point, perhaps for a romantic relationship, but I think much more for a business idea or creative venture, or something to do with your self-expression is going to start to be prepared for a wider audience at that stage. So from some of these challenges that you've experienced over the last few years, I feel that you will start to feel much more settled at the start of December. And as Saturn moves into the sign of Pisces on the 7th of March, yes, there could be the need to reform your approach to your core values, the foundations of your world in terms of how you regulate your everyday existence, especially financially. But of course, the second house is also about our self-worth, and Saturn may test that. If you have got chinks in what really defines you in terms of your qualities, Saturn will test them, but also be teaching lots of new skills over the following 2.5 years. Now Pisces, Saturn for you has been in the 12th house, which very psychological, and Uranus in the 3rd, very much to do with the nervous system. So a lot of anxiety. You may have wanted to retreat for huge amounts of time. You may not have felt quite so outgoing as you have in the past. But Saturn moving into your sign, wow. Now obviously there can be the physical limitation that Saturn can bring, but it depends on where you are born. So if you're born right at the start of Pisces, I think you are right up to the first week of Pisces people. You are potentially going to feel some limitation next year in a big way, because Pisces gets up to 7 degrees before going into a retrograde, but then it rotates right the way back to 0 degrees. But Saturn's also going to help you to really understand what's really important to you, the individual, to take back a bit more control of your life. The tendency that Pisces have to be very, very giving, if that goes to a great degree, it can lead you to feel a little bit invisible at times. A lot of the people who are the most compassionate people in life are Pisces people, or people with a lot of 12th house energy, very much in keeping with the values of your sign. So it's great to help, but it's also very important to draw it all back to the core and really define what's absolutely essential to you in terms of a simplified version of your life, and really get intimate with your great core qualities. And that will be the lesson and the help that Saturn can provide in the following 2.5 years. But if you're born in the first week, I think that's where you're really going to feel the energy of Saturn in the first house in the first year. And for other Pisces people, there may still be quite a lot of psychological energy working around, because essentially Saturn will still, in terms of thinking of the orb of that transition up to 7 degrees, technically be in your 12th house. So a challenge is possible, but also an opportunity to set those boundaries, which is Saturn's very much about. Work on simplifying your life, bring it down to the core, and that is going to see a chrysalis process go on, which at the end of the 2.5 year period will see you much clearer about who you are, what you have to give, what you want to give, but also what you will not accept. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thank you so much for joining me. Wishing you all the best with Saturn's transit, and goodbye for now.